Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and this is my husband and co-host, Geoffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and my co-host, Geoffrey Tumlin.
Yellow!
And thank you. We're late waiting for the yellow. And today we're going to talk about the dark side of similarity. Geoffrey, you want to start with the story?
I certainly do. We work with a good friend of ours. I think I would describe her as a legal legend. Actually, I'll tell you, it's Lynn Liberato. She was on our season 2 podcast. And he's really good, really great lawyer. And we were talking about similarity and how a lot of times our work and organization is about helping people pick people who are similar on values, but not just another white dude or just another whatever you have a lot of. Another white male coder or another Hispanic front desk person in some of the places we work in healthcare. You know, try to pick her actual diversity and all the benefits diversity brings. And a lot of times we have to encourage people to cast their net wider in the work we do. But that sometimes you were describing to her research about occasionally people get in trouble because they find that somebody of the same peer group will actually be very difficult on that same peer group. In other words, I'll give you the best example is occasionally in our work, we find that women in very senior positions in companies that haven't historically had a lot of women, whether that's, high tech, it's been this way historically for many years. Management and business has been this way, but that's changed a lot as you've documented in a lot of our conversations before. And so women that actually make it up to the very top sometimes are very tough on other women coming behind them. That's not always the case, but sometimes you find that it's from your very peer group where we're often the most difficult on people. And that Lynn immediately was like, oh my God, this explains this time 5 years ago when we had this verdict and the jury returned basically the opposite verdict that we thought they were going to do. And I think that's because we had people on the jury that were exactly like the plaintiff, and they actually went hard on the plaintiff, not went easy on the plaintiff. And so it just spawned this long conversation, and then you started telling her about all the research. And so that's what we wanted to talk about here is where similarity goes wrong. A lot of times, similarity helps us pick people who think like us and believe like us, and that can be beneficial. But a lot of times it goes wrong, and sometimes it can backfire in the most spectacular way.
About 10 years ago, I found this research, and I'm not even sure I'm going to be able to turn it up again. I'm going to try.
Oh, of course you will.
I don't know. It was in one of our gigantic books. It was in one of the research anthologies.
I think I started a paper with Lynn, and so don't worry. Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
All right. Well, we're going to try to put it in the show notes. But this is it was juries.
Yep.
The research was based on juries. And it was minorities, and I believe that having a jury of peers is the way to go, generally speaking. But the research was basically what Geoff is talking about, where it was surprising that sometimes the jurors that turned out to be the hardest on a minority tended to also be that minority. They tended to share that demographic.
Yep. Right. So you think, we've got a Asian American plaintiff.
We would rather have whole jury full of Asian Americans. But here's the problem is that when you share a group, a psychological group with somebody, and you're standing in another group that you're in that maybe they're trying to get into, or that they already are a part of, but they're marginalized. But when your standing isn't secure, in other words, you feel like there are all sorts of signals that happen when you are not like a full member. Like you might be a literal member, but psychologically not a full member. So it may be that you get interrupted all the time. It may be that when you throw out an idea, nobody responds, and then 5 minutes later, somebody else in the group throws out the same exact idea and everybody jumps on it and tells you what a great idea it was. It may be that you're not invited to certain things. Like there are all sorts of signals that indicate like you're not a psychological member of a group, even if you are a physical member of a group. And so that happens a lot in organizations. And so somebody who is marginalized and shares a demographic similarity that is not high status, those people will tend, so in other words, like women, right? I'll go with that one. There are many, but I'll go with that one. So we've not typically been the high status group. Organizations have been historically run by men, and still, we do not have the same kind of coverage on board seats that our education and the fact that we're 50% of the demographics would indicate would be a fair sampling. So we're still not full-fledged members, so we'll go with women, but there are many groups like this. And so for women who have reached the top of these organizations and are getting the signals that they're not a member of the psychological group at the top, and another woman trying to come up down below, if that woman trying to rise fulfills negative stereotypes that may harm the woman who's risen, that woman is going to be very, very hard on the woman trying to rise in the organization, because it harms her psychological status in the group that she's striving to hold on to.
Yeah, we, not too long ago, I coached a woman with 2 siblings, another sister and a brother, and they were brought up poor in an actual trailer park. And not that we have anything against trailer parks. I have anyway. I guess you probably do too. I have family in trailer parks, and
I do.
But poor, and scratched and clawed and scrambled and made her way up into upper middle class. Beamer, beautiful house, nanny, the whole 9 yards. And her other sister scrambled and made it into middle class, but her brother was still trailer. And those 2 sisters wore him out for not even, he would get hammered and fall asleep on his couch, and they hated that. And, he would, everything. He loved Adam Sandler movies, and they thought that was stupid. I mean, just the things that he did that reminded them, I think, this was my hypothesis, just like that study you mentioned, just like what we're talking about, is that actually reminded them of a past that they thought that they had moved behind or left behind, and it was a little bit too sensitive for them. And so my coaching to this woman was you're being too hard on your brother and your sister. You're piling on this guy. He's not, everything you're describing doesn't sound like a bad brother. And the reason it was a conversation is because she had basically been pulling apart her kids from his kids. And the kids loved each other, right? Cousins, right? And she's like, well, I don't want my kids, you know, getting into crazy, goofy stuff and having that influence and this and that.
Oh, okay, so I gotta stop right here. Just as a little PSA, like, I seriously doubt those kids are gonna look at their cousins' lives and go, "Oh yeah, I'd much rather the car that doesn't start than the BMW." Like,
Yeah.
not that money solves all problems, but a nice life is a pretty nice life. And in fact, probably having them as a contrast might
Could be.
help them have gratitude towards what they actually do have. So that's just
Yeah.
my little PSA on that topic. Like, I'm not thinking they're gonna go, "Hey, I wanna give up everything, every advantage that my parents have given to me."
And I don't dispute that. I wonder if kids even care, right?
I think mostly they
Yeah.
don't care, but if they actually are paying attention to it, I mean, like,
Sure.
it's harder to be poor.
Yeah.
Like,
No question.
it's not only more expensive, which is pretty well documented because you get jammed up with interest
Yeah.
rates and everything
Yeah.
else, but
Stress.
it's harder. Yeah, it's stressful. Nobody's gonna take a much easier life and trade it out and go like, "Oh, geez, I'm striving to be like Uncle Bob."
Yeah, but I have seen this at play, not just in the coaching example, but I see this sometimes, you know, even in people closer in my orbit, where they are upset, or not upset, but they overreact when they're reminded of something they used to be.
Absolutely, especially when the something that you used to be is negative.
Yeah.
Well, or that you perceive it negative. And I don't, like, again, like, we're not dissing on poor people. It's a recognition that it sucks to be poor. And so, like, I think there are plenty of good people who are poor, but your life is much harder because you're poor. And so the people who've climbed out of it tend to have a fear that they're going to go back to it.
I think so.
And it's really hard. It's really hard to make that change, to feel like what I've seen with a number of people that are in our orbits, like, they may have made it, but there's a lot of their behaviors still indicate that they aren't, that fear is so big that even though they have a lot of money stocked away and they have like some insurance that they never will have to go back, they still behave like they don't have money because it's that much of a fear and they don't want to. So in other words, it's another sign that their stability in the identity associated with their new socioeconomic status is not secure.
Yeah.
And so, because you need both those things, you need an unstable identity. Like, you're not entirely, you're getting signals that you're not entirely a full-fledged member psychologically.
Yeah.
And you need that contrast to somebody who you share that an identity with, that makes you feel like the identity you want is potentially in jeopardy.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I think that having not had money and then having money, a lot of people feel like that could go away at any time. And so you've got the first piece of that.
Yeah, it's not unlike, getting a degree and still having nightmares that you missed a test and that the degree,
Sure.
you never finished the degree in reality. Like, some things are so big, so impactful in your life that you never completely get over it.
Yeah. And so as we kind of connect this back up to our discussion today, like when similarity goes wrong. So sometimes it goes wrong because we think that the normal relationship, which is very prevalent.
Normally similarity is good. Normally similarity gives you a tremendous amount of advantages, like, lots and lots of research that says and shows that people who are members of the same psychological group and that could be a physical group as well, but
Yeah.
definitely a psychological group.
Yeah, it could be rich, poor,
Yeah.
Hispanic, Asian, or
It could be this group in
Yeah.
this organization,
Yeah.
this department.
marketing, accounting, whatever.
Yeah. And so, our tendency with similarity is to divert, and again, this is in the research, is to divert resources to people we share significant similar traits to. In fact, not even significant. They can be insignificant. Like, I've done things in class where I've
Sure.
had people break into groups by footwear.
Yeah, sure.
And they'll find all the reasons why their footwear is superior, and that's not really actually the task that I gave them. And if they have stakes, they'll divert resources to it. I mean, like, it's pretty easy to trigger this.
Yeah.
It's just that in life, and in organizations, and like especially with like recent topics on like DEI, like this is part of the reason why we did affirmative action. Generally speaking, we are inclined to like people who are similar to ourselves. We have a tendency to evaluate them more positively, unless we lay out the scenario that we just talked about. And as a result of that, organizations tend to get more similar in certain traits, usually visible traits. And so historically, for example, it's mostly been white men. And because of that, we have policies that impact government agencies and quasi-government agencies, and only those two groups, because those are the only two groups that are actually bound by affirmative action, that try to like balance that out. So that way you actually get a diversity of people. And so I think we probably need to maybe talk a little bit about similarity being not only the default and generally gives us benefit when there's somebody inside an organization who has control of resources to divert it to us, but what kind of similarity do we actually want? And we've only focused on surface similarity, when actually in organizations, the sweet spot is deep level similarity. It's similarity in values and how we do work inside the organization, the overall purpose of the organization, that we believe in it.
Yeah, it's like All Pro. We work with a car company, and they've been extremely good at doing just this. They hire for deep level similarity on a few traits or values, if you like. The values are, number one, you're willing to work extremely hard, or hustle factor, if you call it that. Let's just call it hustle. Number two, you've got to feel like you can do the work hard without taking it too seriously. And so the first thing they hire for is hustle. The second thing is being fun loving. And then the third thing is,
They have nice toys.
yes. And the third thing is that you've got to basically be an excellent troubleshooter and problem solver, because they do so much and they make so many things happen that there's just constantly, you're having to navigate ambiguity and new problems. And so basically, hard work, fun loving, problem solver. And that is what they select for. And they could care less if you're white, black, Asian. I mean, they're only care about, will you work hard? Will you solve problems? And will you not ruin our vibe of basically work hard, play hard? And if you hit those bars, you're hired. And as a result, those are some of the most interesting sessions that we do, because the people are from all over the United States. The company is all over the United States, but the people are from everywhere. And unlike some companies, which over time tend to hire more and more of the same kind of people because of similarity, because of surface similarity, they're getting more diverse as time goes on. they're becoming more ethnically diverse while at the same time deepening their commitment to their three core values.
And so that's really the sweet spot, because what we want is deep level similarity. What we have historically gotten, and why diversity at the more surface level, which that's what I'm going to call gender, race, somewhat religion, because like we sometimes make that visible, like, but basically all the protected classes. But historically, that has been the similarity, and the reason why that is dysfunctional is because, well, I mean, we can have a bunch of white guys in the room, but they may not share values, and so we're not getting the deep level similarity. But also, they have exactly the same experience, and so they're not bringing the diversity. Isn't a marker for different values. Diversity can be, and often is, a marker for different experiences. So you and I, Geoff, we had very different backgrounds, male, female, very different family structures, and yet we landed on the same page. And so just because you are the same in terms of physical doesn't mean you're going to have the same deep values. And just because you are different doesn't mean that you won't have the same values. And so that's where it's been flawed historically, is that by keeping these other groups out and only focusing on, basically white men, which was driven a lot, it wasn't like intentional. Like some of it was like literally just how our society was structured. But a lot of it is actually just, hey, I feel very comfortable with this person because they're like me. But that missed the point of actually getting the deep values. Whereas if you make an effort for surface level diversity, even in this country today, where a lot of the boundaries have been broken down, I mean, like, just even the internet and the communication that we have and the speed of travel, and fewer people are staying in their ethnic clusters, although we could argue that like social media is now doing that at a different level, like people are clustering around similar things. But generally speaking, people who have diverse surface level traits have very different experiences in this world. And those experiences can be really beneficial if they're in the brainchild of an organization, because they wind up bringing their knowledge of the pain of their group into the boardroom, or not the boardroom, but the executive team room.
Or just into the company.
Yeah, well, you got to get into the brain center. I mean, like, at least your ideas have to get up there somehow. It's a lot easier if you're in the executive part. But you have to be part of the brain network in an organization to explain what those pains are, and then start to move forward in solving a large group of people's problems. That's where money's made. People can think kumbaya all they want about diversity, but the fact is that you are screwing up as a capitalist if you are not paying attention to diversity, because it means you are ignoring large patches of the population and the pain that they are going through. And so, I can give you just a really simple example. Geoff and I have talked about this before, because this is the basis of the story. Is a number of years ago, when Uber first started, I was with a friend and her family, and I had to get to the airport, and my options were, because it was like in the middle of the night, pretty much, for me to go, my options were either get on a bus and be at the airport like 3 hours early, which I fundamentally hate that idea, or get in an Uber. And that was what Geoff was like. He's like, why don't you take an Uber? So I'm like, I'm going to be at this airport 3 hours early. I'm sitting on the curb in the dark. And he's like, why don't you get an Uber? And my immediate response was, I'm not getting into a car with a man. Like this.
Yeah,
in the middle of the night.
Morning.
This is a bad idea for me. And it never, like, so basically I took the bus, and Geoff, he was floored by that. But the fact is that you put somebody like me in at the top of Uber, and I'm pulling out that pain point, because the difference is you give me an option for pink Uber and I'm going to get a female taxi, then I'm going to take it. Now, I have to be honest, I've had to go get over it. I had no choice. I take Ubers all the time, but I seriously, there have been many times where I've taken a picture, I've sent it to Geoff. There have been many times I've been on the phone or that I texted, because I haven't, like, the guy decided to not follow GPS. Like, I had an airport drive that was like that. And so I've been a little bit worried, and there have been incidences with women, and we have relatives who are older who will not take an Uber. And if you put me or somebody like me in Uber and gave a pink Uber option where I was guaranteed to have a female, I would feel a lot better about taking Ubers. And I know some of these family members would actually do it, because right now they will not do it. But we're all ignoring, like, the evidence. I mean, Uber has had problems, and like, I think all the ride apps, so I'm not calling out Uber specifically, but these ride apps have had problems with people and sexual assault. And drivers, you should have some cameras, because I don't blame you for protecting yourself. And I don't know why these companies aren't actually requiring it. But again, I'm not in the boardroom, and I can only assume that they're not getting the pain points for women. So I don't mean to be badgering them, they're just the example. Somebody from a different group will bring in their own experience that's very different, and they understand the pain of their group. And from there, you might actually have, a different market, or a market that you're not fully tapping into, because there's a barrier that you're not paying attention to. And so that's the difference between the similarity that we want, which is deep level, versus the similarity we don't want, which is just surface level for no purpose, when actually the diversity would be what the diversity at the surface level is what we want from an experience standpoint. So the sweet spot is similarity in terms of values and personality, while having diversity in terms of these visible traits that we tend to automatically judge and behave based on in society.
Yep, makes sense.
Hello, Musers. Now it's time for commercial break. All right, so it's time to ring the register, and we're going to talk about surveys. And so we do a bunch of surveys, but one of the most popular ones that we do is actually a pretty broad-based survey. It touches on figuring out your values by department, the organization, and then department level, communication flows, where the blocks are, who your influential members are, key attitudes, things like trust and psychological safety, concepts that we want people that we know generally impact how well people identify with an organization, how satisfied they are. And we look at all of that and help you understand sort of where your hot spots are in an organization, always keeping an eye on the fact that we can't out individuals. And so we tackle that usually by, a couple of different ways. Do that by giving the breakdown at departments levels that are big enough, and then also by giving leaders things that they could work on, that they, like when we're in a bigger program, we may actually help reinforce that, things that they could work on without the specific information about how they exactly scored as a department or a group, which allows us to be able to give some actionable feedback for people to make some improvements without jeopardizing potential employees. And these things, we debrief them in 3 hours. Not only are they good information, but sometimes they're a great vehicle to start a conversation that needs to happen. And sometimes we use them as ways to connect up strategy to actions inside organizations. And so if you're interested, give us a call. We're at Culture. That's Culsure. So I did not say T. I said S. Culsure. Ring us up. We're going to be happy to talk to you about it. Bye-bye.
Yep. It's just wasting your similarity if you're hiring people like you and their values aren't the ones that you want shared in your company or in your organization or in your group. And they're not, these values aren't that hard to select for. If you actually know what distinguishes your company, you ought to be able to put it together in one or two words or one or two qualities.
Well, like the hustle.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's a good example of a deep value that you might select on, because it's a value that helps people understand what behavior is appreciated and rewarded in the organization. But what exactly that hustle looks like specifically, it varies based on the person and the job.
Sure.
And so it's like a highway, and everybody's moving in the same direction, but there's still that room for it to fit, basically, like the idiosyncratic nature of people.
Yeah, let's
or something like
run
that.
down between the two of us. We probably can run down the science of deep similarity. So a similarity of a shared value or two, that helps you because it strengthens the company's core values, which is another way of saying the company's culture. It's a coordinating mechanism because you just mentioned, you know how to act. How should I act in this situation if I'm with the car company we mentioned a few minutes ago? Well, you should hustle. You should get out there and make something happen.
Yeah. No matter what situation you face, no matter how novel it is, you basically know this company is going to be okay with my behavior if I show some hustle.
Yes. That's what similarity at a deep level, at a values level, gets you. At a surface level, diversity, the opposite of similarity, hiring people with diverse backgrounds, gets you more creativity, better problem solving, more possibility of finding the pain or opportunity in other.
Pain is opportunity.
Yeah.
If it's a big enough market,
Sure.
it's pain is an opportunity. Now there might be pain with like very narrow groups, but you can't build a business off of that. But when we're talking about the diversity that we usually look at in organizations, which is genders, race, sexual orientation, religion, like these are big groups of people. And if you can solve a pain in those groups of people, you can make money.
Yeah. So you get that if you hire surface level diversity, even though that's not what your first sweep should be for similarity on core values. And then you're looking for diversity of thought because it gets you these benefits: solving the pain points, more creativity, better ability to generate solutions. What diversity asks of us as managers, but also as people who work with people who are different than us, is it's more work, because we are fielding different perspectives, because we are having to listen to other points of view and hear people approach things from a different standpoint.
So a number of years ago, Geoff and I and one of our friends, we were on our way to a funeral, and Geoff was in the left-hand turn lane in the middle of the procession. In the middle of the procession, and we were waiting for the line of traffic coming at us to have a break. He had his turn signal on, and so he gets that break. We think somebody's being nice, and he starts to turn, and we hear this thump.
Like this. I make the turn like this.
And now we have a whole line of people who are part of this funeral procession behind us. So we have, I don't know, like 25 cars that are all part of this. Like, we know them. This is important information. And so he looks down, and a bike cop has just run into the side of our car he was
story.
coming down the double yellow lines
Like this.
with his lights on. So he wasn't in the
Going
spot where
this
you
way.
expected. He was
This,
literally
like that.
driving down the double yellow lines. And so we pull in we take the turn, and then we pull over at the very front of the cemetery, and his aunt immediately pulls in right behind. And in the car we have very different people, and basically Geoff is like, okay, I'm just gonna pay for the damage, and
That's
I'm like,
right. Yes.
the person who is with us is, because Geoff is more conflict avoidant, so that's Geoff's reason. The person who is with us is part of a minority group who absolutely feels like the smart move is to not ever question a police officer, even when they're egregiously in the wrong. And then there's me, who's unbuckling her seatbelt, and I'm like, oh no, I am not paying for what that jerk just did. And so Geoff is like, knows that he's got to go out and deal with this guy. And the guy's immediate response was to basically try to blow it off and put it all on Geoff. And then he's slowly realizing that we have hundreds of witnesses to what just happened, and that he doesn't stand a chance. And so anyway, it's a diversity in the group in terms of how we would approach the situation, that even to this day there are still arguments about what would have been the right decision in that situation. And to me, like, it's very clear to all of us, it's very clear, it's just that we have very different reasons to believe that. And so that's kind of what happens when you put a bunch of people from different perspectives, from different demographic groups in a room. They carry their experiences with them, and there will be arguments about how this thing is going to go down.
Yep, good example. Yeah, by the way, and I did end up leaning Cindy's way, and the cop eventually...
That's because he knew I was going to come out of the car.
The cop eventually coughed it up and paid for everything.
Yeah, we're like...
It took him a few minutes, but he got, yeah.
And then we went to the most fabulous Vietnamese auto repair shop, which that's where the cop directed us.
Yep.
The guy had hand grenades everywhere.
True story.
And he was not taking flack from anybody.
Crazy guy. But he fixed the car.
Yeah, he did a great job.
Yep.
Don't be afraid of the similarity that you have. Just put it into your head that you need to think about the position that person is in. Like, going back to the first part, you just need to think about the position that person is in, whether or not they see that as a secure position, and whether or not what you're doing is going to be triggering a negative stereotype. So for the woman example, just as to highlight this part of it, I have seen this be problematic for people in for women in organizations who are very emotional. Like, in many respects, the fact that we are suppressing men having emotions is bad, and basically trying to shame women to not have the emotions. But if you're crying on the regular basis at work and kind of fulfilling that negative stereotype of a historic woman, the women above you are probably going to avoid you at a minimum. So every once in a while, like when the situation warrants it, like, that's human nature. But there have been times, and sometimes not even really the employee's fault because they have some medical stuff going on, where they're perpetually in tears. And that's an example of when this would really come out.
What makes this conversation important is that I think we've covered a lot of the kind of basics of where similarity helps us. And we've covered something that I had never thought about until you made me aware of the research, which again, we'll put in the show notes, that sometimes there's an overreaction, as you pointed out, if it's a group that we've kind of fought and clawed our way in, and we're worried about how safe and secure is our status in that group. And somebody else like us is clawing their way in, but they're doing things that are stereotypical and potentially threatening.
Negatively stereotypical.
Negatively stereotypical and threatening. Then we sometimes have a tendency to be harder on them than is probably warranted.
Well, I mean, and the reason we're doing that is because we want to demonstrate that we
belong.
are not that.
We belong.
Yeah.
I belong in this country club, metaphorically speaking. Yeah.
All right. I think that concludes us for today. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate your time, your likes, your downloads, your shares.
All of it.
The stars, all of it. Thank you.
All righty.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about the topic, check out our show notes. And if you want to help us out, like, share, subscribe, and 5 stars are all deeply appreciated. See you next time on the Management Muse.